Okay, hi everybody. Once again, it is Monday. I say that all the time. This just happens to be another one of the times that I say it's Monday, for it is Monday, July 14th, about the middle of the month. I am Jake, and this is Politics by Jake. I'm your political correspondent. I am a student of history. I try to weave that into the things that I talk about. It is 7 a.m. or thereabouts in the morning on the morning of July 14th. And we're here with our weekly or bi-weekly. It's Monday and Friday. We're here at 7 a.m. So it's not weekly, it's bi-weekly. I mean, it is weekly, but it's twice a week. And we're here trying to give you an overview. And what I'm going to be doing today is I am going to be talking about Trump. I am going to be talking about some other things too that you ordinarily don't hear me talk about, but which I feel an anxiety to talk about, because I say that I give you a summary overview of stuff, but the way it is with the shows right now, it's impossible to give all of that to you all the time in one show. So we are going to be talking about familiar things. We're all going to be familiar with you. I'm going to be talking about the situation with Palestine, and we're going to be talking about the situation with Ukraine. We're going to be talking about the situation with the Muslim Brotherhood and what's behind them. We're going to be talking about Putin. We're going to be talking about Trump. And I feel like we're at the beginning of like a singularity. In quantum physics, in the study of black holes, there's something called a singularity. And for those of you who care, and I'm going to expand on this. I'm not just going to say, I feel like there's a singularity. All right, moving on. That's not going to happen. We're going to talk about what it is, and you'll understand what I mean. But for those of you who are interested in definitions, a singularity in the context of a black hole is a point in space where the gravitational field becomes infinitely strong, and it causes the curvature of space-time to become infinite. And this next part I'm going to say is kind of ominous based on me defining what I'm going to be talking about as representative of a singularity. When this happens, at this point, the known laws of physics break down and densities become infinitely large. It's essentially the core of a black hole, where matter is thought to be compressed to an infinitely small volume. So in other words, when you hear me say, there's a singularity, I feel like we're approaching a punctum saliens, which is a specific point. It's kind of a momentous thing. I'm not quite capable of stating it all in one sort of concise, coherent concept. And I mentioned that earlier in the show. I just, I wish we had, more time. But I hope the concept, I'm going to try. I hope the concept will emerge from the program as a whole. We always try to do this. We're attempting to follow the evolution of the world strategic situation, economic, political, cultural, increasingly now, and a number of very important things are going on. And I have the feeling that we're approaching a decisive point. This was the kind of thing the philosopher of history and the poet Friedrich Schiller described as a punctum saliens. You just heard me say this. Punctum saliens, that's Latin. It means basically a salient point, a kind of a point that emerges and sticks out. And it shows that something that we're approaching such a moment, and I'll try just to give you a rundown on what that looks like, but we're approaching a moment. But I think you can look for events to speed up, especially I think in the time now between mid-July, which is, where we are here on this Monday, July 14th, to mid-September. So maybe a 60-day period. And let me remind you, we were told that the Russians, and I spoke about this on Friday's show, the Russians have concentrated 160,000 troops opposite the Ukrainian border. They have massed those soldiers there, and they're looking for the opportunity to attack. Although it's somewhat mystifying, and I do have my views on this, but let me not get ahead of myself. Let me just say that to me, it's somewhat mystifying why they haven't attacked already. And you will recall, I talked about Zapad 25 in the show. And Zapad means west. That's what it is, Zapad 25. And the last time they did that was when they attacked Ukraine in Zapad in 2021. And you will recall I talked about this. It's mystifying because the Nazis, they found this out. In 1941, the campaigning season, military campaigns are best waged starting in April or May in this area of the world, because as soon as the winter mud has dried up, you've really got to get going. And that's like April, because this thing called the Rasputitsa, the muddy season, comes then in what seems to be very early autumn, certainly by October, it's going, and perhaps even in September. So we're told that we've got this report now, just came in a little while ago, that according to one of the magazines here, the little magazines, in Washington, D.C., there's this story by Eric Malinowski from the New Voice of the Ukraine. He reports Putin's Ukraine. He believes, and this is representative when you see the 160,000 troops, Putin believes that victory over Ukraine is months away. And what would that mean? I mean, how would you do that? I mean, I think from Putin's point of view, that would seem to imply or entail some kind of an attack, right? 160,000 troops, Zapad 25, some kind of an offensive that would essentially secure victory, whatever that might be defined as in his, admittedly very twisted and sick book. I mean, I'm not a trained psychologist, but I do have a minor in psychology, and I have worked in mental institutions. We're going to have a decisive moment, this punctum saliens moment. You'll remember that we've just had, of course, this monstrosity, this monster austerity bill, the bungling, bastardized bill, or whatever you want to call it, the criminal corruption bill. But that is now done. And the story was for several weeks, and we covered it, here on Politics by Jake. The story was for several weeks in Washington that as soon as the big bastardized bill is approved, they would turn to this question of sanctions against Russia. And it means, above all, the so-called bone-crushing austerity bill put together. I'm sorry, in this case, it's sanctions, not austerity, for Russia. Put it that way, the bone-crushing sanctions assembled by Senator Graham of South Carolina and Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, who have both been very active on this and acting as a team. And it's quite interesting that this sort of bedrock question of will the West survive, will Western civilization survive the onslaught of Putin, who represents a fundamentally alien civilization. He is not representative of Western civilization. He is the orthodox, and I've talked about this too. I talked about this in 2021. Anyway, go to Politics by Jake, go youtube.com / Politics by Jake. I've got several videos talking about this. I will tell you now more. It's kind of this Orthodox Byzantine civilization that goes back to the Eastern Roman Empire, which some call Byzantine. I, disagree. It was Rome. It was Rome. Those people were Romans. And it's a kind of a Siamese twin, but it's one that has seen its name tasked for millennia, or at least one millennium anyway, in chastising, punishing, and trying to destroy the West, the putrid West, as Slavophiles put it. So that this is building up over there again with Putin and Duginism and Eurasianism. And this does, all of which we've also talked about on videos. And this does not change. It hasn't changed, well, since about the time, certainly since the time of the Council of Florence, in the Council of Florence in the late 1430s. The time when Russia was invited to join the Italian Renaissance and said no, never. Big mistake. Big mistake. And of course, that's the root of the continuing backwardness over there on the Russian side, and they are backward. But this is now going to come to a head sometime soon. Now, parallel to that, intimately connected here on the U.S. domestic front, we've got this moment where the whole Trump policy is in flux. And at the same time, what I seem to detect is a tendency of the U.S. government to be fragmenting. In other words, the Trump regime, the clique of people, the cabal, as you hear me tell it, the utopians, and by the way, utopia is always reactionary, always backwards, not forward-looking, backwards. So utopians and scoundrels, really scoundrels in the White House, they're losing control of the United States government. And that, under these conditions of acute heteronomy, acute oligarch on oligarch rivalry, we're approaching, like I said at the beginning of the show, some kind of moment where the United States government is going to have to be brought back together again, like Humpty Dumpty, or face some very terrible consequences. In other words, this orgy of anti-government activity, the attempt by Trump, and I'm talking about the fascist cabal that's got the reins of government, got the judicial, got the executive, got the legislative branch. That's what I'm talking about when I say anti-government activity. This attempt by Trump and company to smash the state. And this, like I said, the United States, and I said this on Friday's show, this is the modern state, par excellence. Here, right? United States, par excellence, such as it is. But, nobody's going to say it's perfection. I mean, what was it? Plato said perfection is like a wheelbarrow. And, Plato was just kind of like, I don't want to diss the guy, but he was kind of like, an argument could be made that all he was a scribe of Socrates, because Socrates never wrote anything. So you could kind of look at it that way. And he said, and it may well have been Socrates who said it, but Plato said that perfection's like a wheelbarrow. The wheel on the wheelbarrow is the perfection. And here we are pushing the wheelbarrow, and you never get to perfection. You're always moving forward, but you never get to perfection. But it's what we've got after all these years, right? Since Christianity, since Richelieu, Cardinal Richelieu of France, Three Musketeers, those of you who've seen that. Now there's this. And you've got to keep this going, hopefully for the benefit of others as well, who are coming after us. And at this point, let's take a commercial break that end this first segment of the show and hear from some of the people at Twain Consulting. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake. Okay, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And we're getting to a point now where, for example, we've got this question of who cut out, and we're talking about how the government's falling apart and how the fascist cabal that has gotten control of the government, amazingly, it's just something that you look at and you shake your head, is doing all sorts of anti-government activity. I'm not talking about the attacks on the ICE Gestapo and other things like this, which some might say, oh, well, that's the anti-government. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what Trump is doing. Trump is anti-government. His fascist cabal is anti-government. That's what I'm talking about. So let's talk about it. We're getting to the point where we've got this question about who cut off the military shipments to Ukraine. Who cut it off? Now, this is a controversy where Trump says, it's not happening. No, I would know if anything happened. I would know. I would be the first to know. And let me just read that to you. Can I? Let me read that to you as a quote. This is a quote from Trump, okay? We're going to send some more weapons to Ukraine. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now. They're getting hit very hard. We're going to have to send more weapons. Defensive weapons primarily, but they're getting hit very hard. And then he goes through this stuff about how if anything were decided, that is he, would be the first one to know. I would be the one deciding, he says. Well, yeah, of course not. No. Because half the time, you ask him a question, what do you think of this? And he says, I don't know about it. Never heard of it. What are you talking about? Who said that? And all of this stuff. Because the guy doesn't read the briefing books. He never has. He never did during the first Trump administration and all the things that we've known for these many years. But now, the thesis here, actually, we do have an article, if I may bring this up, and it's done by Brandon J. Weichert. Brandon J. Weichert, writing in one of the minor or lesser Washington, D.C. publications, he writes about who made the decision. Now, it had been assumed that the decision to cut off the weapons to Ukraine had been carried out by Hegseth. The story now is that the person who put this all together is a guy named, get this, Elbridge Colby. Remember when I've talked to you before about the banality of evil? Here it is. Here it is, Elbridge Colby. In other words, despite the hegemonic idea in the media that this was Hegseth who did this on his own authority, and he doesn't have any authority. He's simply an office boy for Trump. That he thought that the shipments to Ukraine would simply stop. And of course, this is impossible. So anyway, we get the thesis of this article by Weichert, which is that a certain Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, is the one who did this. He's described in the article as one of the very few dyed-in-the-wool Trumpists left that the Pentagon is a sea, or in a Pentagon, I should say, which is a sea of neocons and warmongers, and that this guy, Colby, was the only one who took the initiative to cut off the shipments. Now, this thing about cutting off the shipments had been in the air. It's, of course, illegal. That money was authorized. It was appropriated under a law. The House and the Senate, and Biden signed it. So this goes back to the Biden administration. So that's where the authorized and appropriated money comes from. It is an article written in a publication called, I was looking up the name of the article, in a publication called The National Interest. It's one of your lesser Washington, D.C. publications. And the idea is that this is the art, that the attitude of the article from the outset of Trump's diplomacy of temp. The Russians have been clear. The only way to a peace negotiation is for the United States and NATO to stop flooding Ukraine with weapons. In other words, betray your own ally. Betray your own fighting ally that has essentially wrecked half of Putin's war machine. And now that they performed that service, it's time to dump them, according to this Russian wisdom. So, well, the phrase, useful idiots, which was coined, so far as I know, by Lenin, comes to mind. But Trump realizes now that his popularity has taken some terrible hits. And this idea of the taco that you have, tariffs on China, no tariffs, tariffs, no tariffs, half tariffs, full tariffs, triple tariffs, on and on and on. And that this act it's really getting old. And then you've got these other failures. Again, if people are aware of anything, they may know that now we've got the biggest measles epidemic going on in the United States in many, many years. And then we've got the Texas floods, where it's clear it's a kind of a co-production, that in Washington we have the systematic decimation, which again I talked about just on Friday, of the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then the United States Weather Service, the old Weather Bureau going on, and how that decimation of the ranks of the Weather Service opened up this tremendous vulnerability. And we were told that the principal official responsible for linking a weather forecast with community mobilization, with decades of experience and all of the contacts, in order to get fast action to say at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be flash flooding. And get that done and get the people to high ground so they won't be there when the water begins to come through at 5 o'clock in the morning. There was time to evacuate, but it wasn't done. And I mean, what's the cause of that? Well, a bureaucracy like this, it's like a military force, really. It's got to be a well-oiled machine. It's got to have all the connections, all the synapses, have to be absolutely demonstrable. They have to be firing. And they did quite the opposite. So now we've got what looks like about, I would guess, ultimately 300 plus deaths in Kerr County, Texas, surrounding areas. And it's not stopping there. There was just a cloudburst in Washington, D.C. There were reports of a tornado, a funnel cloud in one of the northern suburbs of the District of Columbia. So the point is this. The entire reliability of the weather forecast, which is so fundamental to human life in general, inevitably, this is now all up in the air. So there's a sense of a kind of earthquake. Remember what I said. Singularity. Punctum saliens. And it's going to be a political earthquake before too long, because it points to the absolute incompetence, chaos, certainly venality, of the money-grubbing hustlers and scoundrels of this administration. So, I mean, that's all going on. You've got all that. You've got the domestic stuff. And then you've got this situation with Ukraine, which I think we can get into in this segment. We're going to talk more about it, but I think we can start on it now. There's also the Gaza thing going on, Hamas, Palestinians. But this is decidedly secondary on the Gaza and the Hamas. And there's a whole thing about that, and I'm going to explain it, I swear. But for now, let me just say, in my opinion, it's decidedly secondary. The fate of the world, I would stress, the fate of the world is decided in Eastern Europe and in the so-called heartland, the areas around that. And that's the old Mackinder geopolitics. At the moment, that's not always true, but at the moment, I think it's increasingly true. We have the quote from the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, and Wang says to the European Union representatives, we in China cannot allow Russia to lose the Ukraine war, because if they do, the United States will be able to complete the long-awaited, launched by Obama, I guess you would call it, pivot to Asia. And we, representatives of the communist Chinese regime of Tiananmen Square infamy, where we killed our own people by the thousands, and we don't even have accurate figures on that. It could be the tens of thousands. We can't take that. We want to have a free hand, and we can't have that if the U.S. are not distracted, as he puts it, into Europe. So remember, these fronts are the same, okay? And therefore, says Wang Yi, we therefore support the Russian war effort with the sort of precursor parts, chemicals, elements, that they slap together and that they throw into the Ukraine battlefield. So it's all unified. And you can't say, let's have appeasement in Europe and let's have something else in Asia. Let's be soft on Russia and tough on China. You can't do that because this is essentially an amalgam or an amalgam, pardon me. An amalgam, not that they have the same goals or anything like that, but that just as a strategic matter, each one is dependent on the other objectively, no matter what their policies are. This is the Sino-Soviet bloc, which they tell you doesn't exist anymore. And I'm here to tell you that it exists. It's been around for a long time. And if you think that it went away, it didn't go away. And there it is. And remember, let me just get into this before we close the segment. Putin believes in something, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. It's called the theory of Moscow, the Third Rome. Or as the Russians would put it, and you'll excuse my Russian for my Russian listeners, Moskovskaya Teoria Tretova Rima. And it means that there are three empires at stake here, okay? The original Roman Empire in Rome on the banks of the Tiber in central Italy, that's the first. That fell in 476 AD. But the second Rome had already, long before, been transferred to the east. Diocletian, Constantine, in the period around 300 AD, they transferred a lot of the imperial functions and so forth to the Bosporus. Some of them to other places, true enough, but principally then to Constantinople on the Bosporus, in what is today Turkey. It's on the European side, and that's the Bosporus, the exit from the Black Sea into the Sea of Marmara. So that's the second Rome, and that fell too. That fell in the 1450s. The Ottoman Empire took that over. So that was the second Rome, and the idea then is there was at this time, or thereabouts, what I guess the old Romans would call a translatio imperii, a transfer of the empire, which was carried out then. And this is just really important because this happened. This exists. This isn't just Jake talking through his hat. This happened. And this is the way it went. The center of the empire went to Moscow, according to this prophecy. And this was done by an apocalyptic monk. His name was Philotheus. Again, go to youtube.com/@politicbyjake. I've got at least one video. I think I've got 2 or 3 that talk about it. Philotheus Episkoph, there's a monastery there, and he writes to the Tsar in the early 1500s. And, the interesting thing is, actually, he wasn't the Tsar yet. This guy was the Grand Duke of Moscow still, but soon after, he does become the Tsar. And that office still becomes the czardom. And he says, Tsar, and Tsar is like a Temitic form of Caesar. Kaiser is a similar form. It means Caesar. He says, Tsar, 2 Romes have fallen, and a third one stands, and a fourth there shall not be. And that third one is Moscow. So, okay, that's about all we have time for on that. I mean, we're coming back. But let's take a break. It's been a long segment. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Imagine, if you will, having the power to disappear from the prying eyes of creditors, identity thieves, nosy strangers, all while protecting what you've worked so hard to build. That's what virtual invisibility offers. It's not magic. It's smart legal and business strategy to shield your assets and privacy so you can live free, confident, and in control. Most people think that asset protection is only for the ultra-wealthy, but it's for anyone who wants peace of mind and financial security, including you. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control now. Call me at 213-465-0639 or go to facebook.com/Twain Consulting to learn how virtual invisibility can protect you and your family, because when you're invisible to risk, you're unstoppable. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/Politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. All right, and this is Politics by Jake. We are back. So, picking up where I left off, Philotheus of Pskov writes to a guy who isn't even the Tsar yet, who's the Grand Duke of Moscow, but he becomes the Tsar. And he says, 2 Romes have fallen, and a third one stands, and a fourth there shall not be. So, and that's Moscow, because he's the Grand Duke of Moscow, see? That's why he's writing to him. So the idea is world domination, world conquest by Moscow. Moscow, according to this, is the third Rome in this crazy apocalyptic prophecy. And in the minds of many of them, I can tell you this, over there, I don't want to say they all know it, but a lot of them know it, including the rank and file Muscovites, because remember, the Greek Orthodox Church, Russian Orthodox Church, and the Russian Orthodox Church is all over Ukraine. So they know it too. It's their version of the prelude to the end of the world, the last judgment, the second coming of Christ. All these things together, which a lot of them want to see happen. Just like the crazy nutjob evangelicals, Christian evangelicals in the United States also want to see these things happen. They wouldn't miss it, not for the world. So they want that to happen. And it's the same way in Russia. Okay, but for that to happen, though, the Russians have to conquer the world. So, I mean, this is kind of disjunct. It's kind of schizophrenic. I realize that, but I'm just trying to relate to you how they think about it. So don't shoot the messenger. This is what proponents of this, Duginism, Eurasianism, this is what they think. So therefore, they're not going to give these things up. And you have reached this terrible situation where it's just like Hitler. By 1939, it was clear to everybody, after that he had betrayed on the Rhineland, which was first, then on the Austrian Anschluss, on the question of the Sudetenland, the rest of Czechoslovakia, and then he was making demands on Poland. And what was clear is that you couldn't negotiate with this guy. Agreements with Hitler were pointless. It was a waste of your time. You weren't going to get anything, except maybe a little delay, if that. And this is now the status of Putin. He is incorrigible. He is an exponent of international anarchy. His target, his goal, is the destruction of Western civilization, which he does not represent. He is an antagonist of Western civilization, the sort of Siamese twin that's locked in this sibling rivalry, right? Because both are theoretically Christian, but one big difference, and I'm talking about the Western side of Christianity and the Eastern side of Christianity, Siamese twins. But both theoretically Christian, but with big differences, with differences that actually matter more than the similarities in political practice. So anyway, so that's our situation. So that's what's behind that. So all right, so the Ukrainian situation may be close to a turning point. And again, it's 160,000 Russian troops, supposedly massed near the Ukrainian borders. Originally, it's opposite Kharkiv, but other places too. And we've got our eyes not just on Ukraine, but will this be combined with this question of the Suwalki corridor, which I also talked about on Friday. And it's a narrow neck of land to the east of it. You have Belarus, completely owned by Russia. It's completely owned and operated Russian satellite. These are what you would call white Russians. So the great Russians rule the white Russians, and they want to attack the so-called little Russians. That would be Ukraine or the Ruthenians, Ukraine. So that's one thing. And then on the western side of the Suwalki corridor, you've got the Kaliningrad enclave. And that's a piece of Russia. It's not connected to the rest of Russia. It's East Prussia, right? It's the city of Königsberg, where Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, that's where he lived. It's in a city of the German Hanseatic League, which the Russians took over at the end of World War II. So the idea would be this: if you can close that gap, the corridor that goes between Belarus and the Kaliningrad enclave, then you have cut off 3 NATO countries: Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. See? From north to south. And we've still got that question. We've got that question. And those reports about some kind of Russian quick grab to grab the city of Narva and Estonia, this is the extreme northeast flank of NATO. Remember, though, on the positive side, we've got a brigade of the German army, the Bundeswehr, a permanent brigade in Lithuania. And you can go back and remember a brigade. You could say, well, you can't stop a whole Russian, expeditionary force. You can't stop a striking force of 75,000 guys with a single brigade. And that's true, but this is the point. What you're doing there is you're putting in a tripwire, you see? The United States Army Berlin Brigade was just like that in West Berlin, all the way from 1945 or so, all the way to 1989, 1991, thereabouts. It was a tripwire. The Russians knew that if they attacked West Berlin, they'd be running into the United States Army. And that would make it impossible for even the most cowardly, the most corrupt, the most poltroonish U.S. president, like Donald Trump, to simply ignore that. And that's what this Bundeswehr brigade would be in this case. And in this case, it's kind of a token of the commitment of all the NATO countries. So now let's be guided here. And I was watching a video the other day about a guy who hates MacArthur. And a lot of people hate Douglas MacArthur. And I can understand that. He's a checkered guy. General MacArthur, in his speech to Congress, when he was fired by Truman and Dean Acheson and Dean Rusk and the rest of them, the so-called firing squad that fired General MacArthur, came back and he told the Congress the very nature of war requires that you avoid prolonged indecision, that you need a decisive outcome, and that it's the function of war in human affairs that instead of these crises that go on endlessly, these forever wars, it can be a terrible conclusion, but at least a conclusion. As I think it was Sherman who said, the only mercy of war is to end it fast. I should get that quote for you so you can read that. He said, I think he started out, he said, war is hell. There's no reforming it. The only thing you can do with war is to end it fast. That's a paraphrasal. So MacArthur's famous dictum, and he did say that, but I think he was quoting Sherman. In war, there is no substitute for victory. And he did say that. Hey, Donald Trump, ever hear of victory? If your political program, I say to you, Donald Trump, is to make America great again, you've got to go back to victory. By some counts, the last great U.S. victory was General MacArthur's Incheon landings, which was just, tactically was brilliant. Complete defeat of North Korea. September 1950, if I'm remembering correctly, the defeat of the original North Korean invasion of South Korea, driving the communists all the way back up the Yalu, because they were down in Pusan. And the United Nations forces, they were in this thing called the Pusan Perimeter, this small area of South Korea, and they were about to be destroyed. And then MacArthur did the Incheon landings, completely turned everything around, drove them all the way up to the 38th parallel Chinese border between North Korea and mainland China. And what he's saying is that you've got to realize that war cannot be carried on indefinitely. You cannot have all these rules. You cannot, for example, have a privileged sanctuary for an enemy. The idea was Russia wants you to think of Russia as a privileged sanctuary. And they do. When attacks can be made, but nothing, Russia can attack you, but you can't attack Russia, see? That has kind of pretty much been chewed up in the course of this kind of situation that we've just been in. The Ukrainians definitely not buying that one. So Putin has made his choice, and we have to realize it. If, in fact, we did not realize it in 2021, which, I did, but just saying, he's made his choice. We have to understand Putin has chosen all-out war. As I said before on other shows, this is the hill that he dies on. He is at war as much as he can be. There's no way he could be more at war, really, without, of course, starting to fire his tactical nuclear weapons. I guess he could do that. And indeed, intercontinental ballistic missiles. He's got ICBMs for the United States, for Canada, for others. He's got IRBMs, which are intermediate range ballistic missiles. Those can cover all of Europe, all the way out to Ireland and to Portugal, places like this. And, to Russia, Turkey, of course, traditional enemy. But this is the thing we need to realize. Diplomacy is exhausted. It's another way of saying you can't make deals with Hitler because he won't keep the deals. This is the limitation, right? The art of the deal does not contemplate Hitler in 1939, where the guy has, he said, this is my last territorial demand in Europe. Well, you keep making demands, though, right? He kept making the demands. After the Sudetenland, he wanted Bohemia. After that, he wanted Slovakia, the eastern part of Slovakia. Make that into a separate puppet state. And then he wanted pieces of Poland. Then he wanted all of Poland. And then he wanted the extinguishing of Poland. You can't deal with a person like this. It has to be the language of force. And that is what we recommend. Diplomacy is exhausted. Stop talking about negotiation. Negotiations are pointless. You've got to force Putin to come begging to the peace table. And what I recommend is you can simplify it even more. So, all right. So what do we need? Let's see if I can get through this. It's possible to contemplate, certainly, maybe not de rigueur, but you would do well to have an ultimatum by the United States and other countries, the coalition of the willing. United States can rejoin the coalition of the willing. They will be allowed back in, begin to show some leadership instead of the skulking and cowardness and malingering and whining. And the way to do that would be on the part of the United States. The 30 governments of the coalition of the willing, minus the United States, are not doing any of that. It's the United States, led by the fascist cabal of Donald Trump, that's doing that. Typical Queen's landlord. Money grubbing, nickel pinching, whining. I'm always getting taken. It's so unfair. That's what you've got representing the United States, and it's got to stop. So getting back to the way to do this would be we governments, we free world governments, Japan is welcome, of course, South Korea, so forth. And I'd say the Republic of China and Taiwan would be most welcome as well. We demand that Russia withdraw all forces from Ukrainian territory, repatriate your own troops to your own Russian territory, like Gromov did in Afghanistan. You will not be molested. You will be allowed to leave. Go and stop bombing. Stop artillery. Stop any and all missile airborne artillery system attacks on Ukraine. And after that, we can have negotiations. But the prelude to negotiation has to be get out of Ukraine. Like I said, the Gromov plan. That's what Gromov did. He said, what am I going to do? I have to leave. Good. You should leave. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, I'm Jake with Twain Consulting. And if you're a business owner, freelancer, or entrepreneur, protecting what you've worked so hard to build starts with solid agreement. Imagine having agreements that make misunderstandings disappear and costly disputes a thing of the past. Get It in Writing is the all-in-one legal form package designed just for people like you, savvy entrepreneurs who want clear, enforceable contracts, whether you're hiring trusted contractors, leasing space, or closing deals that move your business forward. Get It in Writing provides easy-to-use, professionally drafted forms that save you time, money, and stress. Right now, you can get full access for just $99. That's 80% off the regular $497 price. A limited time opportunity you don't want to miss. Picture the peace of mind you'll have, knowing that your business is fully protected so you can confidently focus on growth and success. Don't wait until the unexpected happens. Take control. Secure your business today with Get It in Writing. Call us now at 213-465-0639 or visit facebook.com/Twain Consulting to get started. Now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/Politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. All right, we've gotten to the point where the coalition of the willing, including other nations like South Korea and Japan, be most welcome, Taiwan, we're saying, you need to leave. You need to follow the Soviet general, Gromov, who left Afghanistan. There are no negotiations, really. So let's talk about what we need here. Here are some action points, okay? The immediate large-scale shipments, the U.S. Patriot missiles, including the most advanced Patriot missile systems, and other Patriots. And we have, the U.S. Army has a great anti-drone system. It's mounted on a large Jeep, and it's got, Gatling guns, I guess, on top, and other things. There are some Israelis, I believe, that have something with lasers, but get those. Get the anti-drone systems to Ukraine. In the last couple of nights, or since last week, we had a couple of nights where the Russians, and this is the insanity of Putin. The Russians have put up like 530 drones, plus a bunch of ballistic missiles. And then the other night, it was 728 drones with a number of ballistic missiles. So, stop haggling about money, okay? It was once said in another context, right, with the crisis with Mexico, where Volcker, the Treasury, said, I don't care what you pay for oil. Stop wasting time with the price of oil. In this case, stop haggling about money. It's great to go from 2 to 5%, but that's all medium to longer term. We don't give a damn how much this costs. You've got to say the priority, the imperative, the absolute must is to get those systems delivered. And of course, the Russians are fools in the sense that they're making the same mistake as Hitler. Hitler thought that the Blitzkrieg bombing, the constant Luftwaffe bombing of London, would break the morale of the British people and lead them to demand surrender. And it boomeranged. Big time! And that's what's happening to Putin. He really believes that by sending these storms of drones and things into Ukraine, that he's going to make the Ukrainians cave in and sue for peace. And this will not happen. This will not occur. The report the other day was just in the past 24 hours. The Russians launched upwards of 725 drones and a dozen ballistic missiles against Ukraine. This is the biggest attack ever. Do you know what happened? They killed one guy. One dead. And that sums it up. Tragic as the one dead is, and certainly it is tragic, this is a lunatic investment of military assets, and it won't work. And it also is very bad international public relations that seem to be happening here. So stop the haggling. We're not shopkeepers. We're not debt collectors, right? We're supposed to be great powers. Then we have the Graham-Blumenthal bill in Congress. Starts in the Senate, of course. And because of who's putting it forward, we just had the past 24 hours. We had Macron, the president of France. Past 72 hours. Macron, Sir Keir Starmer of Britain, Prime Minister meeting in London. It's an attempt now to create the Anglo-French Entente. Of, 1903, which has been on and off ever since, different kind of contents. But Macron meets with Starmer. Get the bad blood of Brexit out of the way. Try to minimize the idiotic self-inflicted damage of Brexit. Boris Johnson, what a moron that guy was. But the idea is, they say, we've got to have more sanctions against Moscow. They've got to have the coalition of the willing. This is now the Anglo-French coalition of the willing with 30 countries. And they're talking about what to do now is sanctions. What to do for the future is to have a peacekeeping force ready to go. Continental Europeans go into Ukraine and increase this tripwire function. And that's, I think, exactly right. You force Putin to the negotiating table. That's correct. And if you want to have that, you don't want to delay it, though. You want to end the fighting. Russians out, Russian go home, Ivan go home. That's the only way to look at it. And the Russian economy, of course, is in very bad shape. In addition to Macron and Starmer in the room, we had a number of others calling in, on a Zoom call. Italian Prime Minister Meloni, who's very good on these international questions. Zelensky of Ukraine, Senator Graham, Senator Blumenthal were part of this consultation. And so it went from a bilateral France-England, with France essentially representing the European Union, dealing with the United Kingdom. But then it was expanded to become the question of Ukraine. There had just been a conference in Rome, Italy, about development, the economic reconstruction and development of Ukraine, starting now, because you have to. Because look, you're going to need electricity for the winter. You're going to need heating for the winter. You can't just say all of that waits for peace. It can't really wait for peace in quite the way that some people seem to think. You've got to recognize, how brutal this thing is that's being done by the Russians. All right. So we want the Congress to pass and sign the Graham-Blumenthal bone-crushing sanctions bill. And the idea with this bill is if you buy oil or other sanction elements from the Russians, you are hit with a 500% U.S. tariff. Now that makes sense. I am absolutely with this. This is what a tariff should be used for. So essentially, this says to China, mainland China, okay, you choose. You want to trade with the U.S.? Okay, it can be reasonable. But if you insist on being the backup, the rear echelon of the Russian attack on Europe, then no. Then you can go and stew in that juice, and you will have riots because your whole economic shtick is based on trading with the West. And you think you have a right to it? Well, you don't. And this is the measure that's now on the horizon. So China, India too, right? Oh, you want to be morally superior? Fine. You can't be the main purchaser of Russian oil. And you can modulate some of that stuff. Obviously, you want to be much, much more understanding of the problem of India than you do of China. Because, China is arming for war. India is not arming for war against the West. Okay? So let's not kid ourselves about that. All right, then point 3. The Russian assets in the Western banks were held to a large extent in Belgium. Not only, but to a large extent in Belgium. Russian assets in Western banks need to be confiscated, expropriated, seized, and both the interest, which is now already going with the interest, right? That the interest on these holdings being used to arm Ukraine. But the principal, the actual money, the assets have to be transferred to Ukraine. So it's out of the reach of the Russians forever. Because one of their demands is that they want all their assets back, and I think they probably want the interest payments back too. So the answer to that is a resounding yet. So that's number 3. Now the other thing is, what I have here on my original list is fire Hegseth. Hegseth absolutely positively qualifies as a provocateur. He's a saboteur. I mean, who told you, Hegseth, to cut off these shipments to Ukraine? It's a public law. And again, once it's passed, You've got to do it. You cannot hoard this money. That's what the Nixonian Anti-Impoundment Act is about. You cannot say, I'm not going to spend the money. You cannot say, well, Trump's not impounding it, but the Secretary of Defense is impounding it. You can't do it. Did somebody tell him? Tell us, give us, put him on the stand. Let's have a hearing. Who told you to do that, Hegseth? Did Trump tell you to do that? He cut off military assistance to Ukraine, apparently without informing other people in the United States government. Now, I don't know if I can really believe that. He didn't inform anybody, but it's possible. So, see what I mean when I started off the show? We're dealing now with the chaotic breakup of the modern state par excellence. And this is intolerable. What Hitler and Stalin could never do is being done from the inside. Okay, so now to conclude, I have a fifth point. We have the Russian Shadow Fleet. This is a fleet of rogue oil tankers. They come streaming out of that thing, the Gulf of Finland, right? The port of St. Petersburg. To the north is Finland. The south is Estonia. They come out of the Gulf of Finland, and they're in the Baltic Sea. Then they've got to go out through Denmark, essentially, right? They've got to pass the islands of, it's the Swedish island of Gotland, and then there's the Danish one. There are two little ones anyway. One is Swedish, one is Danish. And then they go out through the belt, right? From Kattegat to Skagerrak. Start deploying warships there and check them out. If they're carrying illegal oil, then you can take measures. So the United States Navy should be there too. Not just the German fleet and the Scandinavian fleets. They are there. But the United States garrisons in the frontline states. Again, tripwire forces. They're not going to attack anybody. The Berlin Brigade was not going to attack East Germany. They're too weak to attack anybody. But it would be crazy. But for defense, they have a lot to be done, mainly tripwire. You want to start a general war? Fine, then have at it. There's nothing we can do about that. It will be for us to meet your exertions. But expand U.S. garrisons in the frontline states on the eastern flank of NATO. That would be going from north to south, Finland, of course, if countries want this. And I think many of them do. They've all been under Soviet domination. They know Russia. They don't want what Russia is selling. Offer it to be sure. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, followed then by Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey as well, all of whom have a border with Russia. So offer them significant increases in U.S. garrisons, just like the Berlin Brigade of the Cold War. And that's about all the time we have. We've gone over time already. I had more, but it'll have to wait for Friday's show. I hope you have a pleasant week. We'll see you all, God willing, on Friday. And this is Politics by Jake. And now here's a word from one of our sponsors, Twain Consulting. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting. Let's be blunt, shall we? America is litigious. It's unstable, and it's financially weaponized. If your name is on everything you own, you're a sitting duck. At Twain Consulting, we help you vanish legally, ethically, and permanently. From land trusts to layered LLCs, we teach you how to restructure your assets so the predators can't see them and can't touch them. This isn't a loophole. It's a strategy that the wealthy have used for decades. Isn't it time you got the same protection? Call Twain Consulting at 805-380-5699 or visit us online. Protect what's yours before someone else claims it. And now let's get back to Jake and Politics by Jake. Are you tired of the noise and the spin? Do you want the real story behind the headlines? I'm Jake, and this is Politics by Jake, where I tell you what they won't. And now, we're going even deeper, and I need your help to keep doing it. Join me on Patreon and support independent political analysis that doesn't pull punches. You'll get insider breakdowns, you'll get bonus clips, and first access to new content. So go to patreon.com/politics by Jake. That's patreon.com/politics by Jake. No filters, no fluff, just the truth. Let's do this together.